Was Afrobeats worship with Bless the Lord. You're on 94.9. It is at 4:15 and it's that time of day for Creation Ministries International. And this afternoon we have Dr. John from CMI and of course he'll be answering your questions. Please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Good afternoon, Mick.
It's great to have you here again. Of course, last week, Dr. John, we mentioned a question in regards to I'll give you an example.
Right.
I go to a church, Elam, just up the road here, where there's quite a few Africans. And
Right.
we also have some African pastors come over and speak to us every now and again. We've got a guy called Bishop Joshua who's come over. And it's interesting that in Africa, in some of the churches, miracles just seem to happen more often. And quite often the whole church will experience these miracles. Yet in some Western places like here, we don't see them as much. What's going on?
Yeah, it is an interesting question, isn't it, Mick? And you and I were discussing that last week. And I did have a few thoughts about it. And I think I'd have to agree that that's very much what we do see, because I've got quite a few friends, doctors, who've been on overseas missionary trips, and they've seen these sorts of things, legs straighten out.
So they've gone from here over to there?
Yeah, on missionary trips with a group, and they see some amazing things, and you wonder why that's the case overseas, but not so much here.
Yeah.
And I did have a thought about it. Obviously, there could be lots of reasons, and I don't claim to have all the answers on it at all. But one of the things that I have noted from talking to some people who've gone is there's often a language barrier, and quite often if they're praying for somebody, they haven't got a clue what they're praying for. They don't know what's wrong with the person. They don't even know what their symptoms are. The person does, and often what happens is more of a surprise to the person praying than the person who gets prayed for, because they do see miraculous things happen.
Yep.
And they're often amazed at what
we're talking doctors?
Doctors, yeah, they're amazed at what they see. Not that you can say they weren't expecting it, because they're praying faithfully, and they're expecting the Lord to do something, but it seems to me that maybe they pray in a different way overseas, because they probably do that more in keeping with what the New Testament says. Call for the elders of the church and pray over them. Or lay hands on the sick and they'll recover. So there is more of a. It seems to me like more of a total dependence on the Lord for the outcome.
Yep.
If something doesn't happen, then there's nowhere else to go. They're totally dependent on the Lord. But when you think about what you observe here, we go to church, and at the church service there might be somebody up the front who does a corporate prayer and includes the people in the congregation who are sick and so on. And you believe that the Lord's going to operate on their behalf, but it's a fairly general prayer. It's not specific like it might be overseas. And then you find you're talking to somebody who's got a problem, and they might say to you something like, "Look, I've got an appointment with the specialist next week. Can you pray that I get a good report from the specialist?" Or, "I'm having a blood test next week because my blood glucose was high," or whatever. Can you pray that I'll get a good result from the blood test? So that's completely different, really, from what people are doing overseas.
Yep.
And I thought, are there any scriptural examples of things that perhaps we might be doing a bit better? And there's one example in the Old Testament in I think it's 2 Kings, of King Asa. Now, Asa was one of the good kings of Judah. You know, he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. He was one of the fairly few, actually, good kings of Judah. But the Lord was displeased with him later in his life because he got diseased in his feet. And the scripture says that he sought the physicians before he sought the Lord. So, you know, I mean, aren't we in that situation really in Western society? And I guess it's partly because modern medicine has been so fantastic. I mean, truly, having been in it and the sort of things that man has developed, I believe, with the direction of the Lord, you know, wonderful ways of fixing things that couldn't have been done 50 or 60 years ago, you know. And, I mean, we expect that all of those things are available to us. So that's really the way our mind is thinking, rather than, first of all, saying, well, Lord, what do I do, you know?
Yeah, that's a telephone.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, but there you go. But it's not a hotline to heaven. Wish it were.
Yes, yeah. Well, it seems, though, that, you know, quite often we hear these stories happening in churches in Africa where, you know, so many people witness these miracles. And as you say, doctors from here in Australia have gone and actually seen this happening. And it's something that quite often Aussies sort of scratch their head. I mean, I've witnessed miracles happening here in Australia, but I've got to say they're few and far between in comparison to some of the churches we hear about overseas. And I've always wondered, what is it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously we don't have all the answers, but but it's very interesting, isn't it? And I suspect that it's partly a difference in approach, because let's face it, overseas the people who come along have got nowhere else to go. You know, they don't have the availability of the advances in medicine. They don't have anything. You know, so they are absolutely and totally dependent on these people who are visiting, who they think might be able to help them. They're totally dependent on them, and they throw themselves on their mercy, really. And because they're Christian people, they pray for them, and they expect that Lord's going to work. And he does, very frequently. So, yeah, I think one of the differences is our approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, something else that was in the news just in the last week or so was in relation to the age of the moon.
Oh, yeah. You sent that article through to me, and I thought that was fantastic. And I read it, and the article actually starts off by saying, scientists have studied the moon's surface for decades to help piece together its complex geological and evolutionary history. I mean, it's amazing, you know, that they're assuming that it's got a geological or evolutionary history, you know, complex or not. But if you're a creationist, you believe that it doesn't have anything of the kind. I mean, it was created directly by the Lord, and they're looking at all sorts of different aspects of the moon to see how old it might be. And their conventional belief was that the moon was several, 4.5 billion years old, the same age as the Earth. And they got that from the structures that they can see on the one side of the moon that is facing us. And we always see only that one side. We never see the rear side of the moon, although, of course, we've now had probes that have gone round there. But, they've based their idea of its age and the fact that they believed it was completely inert.
Yep.
Which is what you might expect, because it's much smaller than the Earth, and it's out there in the freezing cold and so on.
Yep. And of course, if it's been there for hundreds of billions of years, it probably
that's
should
right.
be dormant. Yeah.
But the probes from the far side of the moon gave them an idea that maybe it's not quite that old after all. And,
they were out by a few hundred billion years.
Yeah. They then moved it down to only a couple of 100 million years, and maybe it's
that's like 90-something%. They're getting really close to the truth.
But also maybe it's still active.
Yes.
Which would really throw things out, because it shouldn't be. And let's face it, the Bible actually does tell us exactly the age of the moon. It's 3 days younger than the Earth.
Yes, absolutely. That's in Genesis, right?
Yeah, that's right. We know that the Earth is about 6,000 years old, and the Moon's about the same, less 3 days, because it was only created on day 4, whereas Earth was created on day 1. So it is very interesting, isn't it, that you get all this speculative stuff from the scientists, and they really don't know what they're actually talking about, because they don't believe what the Bible says.
But they're definitely moving in the right direction. From hundreds of billions to now millions. I mean, we're talking, 99%. They're getting a lot closer, still out, but...
They've got a bit of a way to go, but but as you say, they're moving in the right direction, and they're recognising that things are younger than they first thought. So it's quite a good one. I reckon that's great stuff, and we can talk about a few more things like that too when we come back.
All right, you're on 94.9. Hey, if you've got any questions for Dr. John, please send them through to our text line 0401 949 949. Coming up next, we've got Kim Walker-Smith with Mama. That was Phil Wickham, Till I Found You. You're on 94.9. It's 21 minutes to 5. And I'm with Dr. John in the studio. Now, Dr. John, of course, is from Creation Ministries International. Every Tuesday we speak with Creation Ministries. We talk about all sorts of cool things, from, dinosaurs to aliens, and, of course, creation and evolution. They're the two biggies. And if you have any questions for Dr. John, we'd love you to send them through to our text line. That is 0401 949 949. That's a text line, so just SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, interestingly, this afternoon you did speak about doctors. One of our first question was in regards to, why do quite often people experience more miracles in African churches than here? And I was just blown away at the fact that you said that, doctors who have gone from Australia over there and have experienced exactly what they tell us when they come over here. And then we started talking about the age of the moon, because, of course, there was an article just last week as far as, the moon, they used to believe it was hundreds of billions of years old, and now they've reduced it down to millions rather than billions, so they're a long way in the right direction, but still not the 6,000 years.
No. And of course, that's what we're always on about, Mick, about the absolute truth of the Bible. Mm-hmm. And there was a great article we haven't mentioned yet that, we've mentioned it many times, that Creation Ministries has got a great website, creation.com. And there are so many fantastic articles on that website. And there was one in the last week about excavations at the ancient city of Jericho. Mm-hmm. And, we all know the song, Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, yes, and the walls came tumbling down, that one. And as usual with these things, the secular archaeologists like to poo-poo it and say, no, it's just another one of those fairy stories that you find in the Bible. It didn't really happen, and how could they have marched around the city for 7 days and then shouted and the walls came tumbling down? This sort of thing. Yep. And they had decided that in their excavations at Jericho that it had been destroyed probably around 1550 BC, which of course is too early for Joshua.
Yep.
But the time has gradually come down to about 1400 BC, which is exactly the time of Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
And really, it is a wonderful story. The Joshua sent out a couple of spies, and they lodged in the house of Rahab the prostitute.
Yep.
Now, I don't know why they went there, but maybe it was some sort of lodging house as well. I'm not sure, but that's where they were.
Yep.
And Rahab she was a pretty switched-on woman, and she'd heard about the power of the Israelite army and that they were on their way, and nobody had been able to stand against them. So she was quite convinced that if they came against Jericho, then they would conquer Jericho.
Mm-hmm.
So she told them, "Look, I'm helping you. I'm going to let you out my window here, and you can get back to your people. But when you come to destroy this city, spare me and my family."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they said, yeah, okay, well, what you've got to do is hang this scarlet cord out the window, and we'll see the cord, and you and your household will be spared.
Yep.
And, of course, that's exactly what did happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it actually fascinating that there's something strange about the women who appear in Jesus' genealogy.
Yep.
You know, when you read the genealogies in Matthew or in Luke, it's always son of. You know, it's the male lineage.
Yep.
But apart in Matthew, apart from Mary, only 3 women actually get a mention. Mm-hmm. And there's something unusual about all of them. Mm-hmm. And the first one is Tamar. And you might remember the story that she pretended to be a prostitute, mm-hmm. and Judah went and had sex with her, and she produced twins, and one of them is in the line of Jesus. Yep. So Tamar gets into Jesus' genealogy, and then Rahab gets into Jesus' genealogy, and the next one who also gets into it is Ruth, who wasn't even an Israelite. Yep. You know, she was a Moabite. So there's something unusual about all the 3 women, apart from Mary, and they're the only ones who get a mention in Jesus' genealogy. I think that's fantastic. But getting back to Jericho itself, it really is fantastic what the archaeologists have found, because Jericho apparently was a very, very well fortified city. It had a double wall, you know, an outer smaller wall and a giant inner wall, and Rahab's house was in the poorer part of town on the outer wall, which is how they managed to get away so easily. Mm-hmm. But it had earthworks making a huge earthen rampart, and then a brick wall on top of that, and it was huge. You know, it was almost impregnable. Yeah. And the city had an unlimited water supply because there was a spring in the middle of it. Yep. And they had plenty of grain stored up. They could have lasted out a siege. And one of the interesting things that the archaeologists discovered, they found some of the grain storage areas, and there was still grain there.
Wow.
Which means the inhabitants didn't get to use it.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I thought that was really fantastic. And they also found some evidence of what they thought might have been earthquake activity. Now, obviously, when the Israelites shouted, the Lord could have, in his foreknowledge, cause a bit of an earthquake at the same time.
Well, I'm pretty sure that sort of thing happened. I mean, for the walls to come down.
Yeah. And apparently it was the brickwork that collapsed, the brickwork on top of the earthen wall, and then it would have been just easy for them to run up over the bricks and into the city and conquer the city. So everything
they've actually uncovered points to the biblical story being correct.
That's right. And like we always say, you can't ever prove that the Bible is true from what we discover, but everything that gets discovered is absolutely consistent with what the Bible says.
Yes.
You know, they never find anything that contradicts it. I mean, initially the experts might poo-poo it, but eventually, as they discover more and more, they find the Bible was right all along.
Yeah,
you know, so. It's fantastic that we can be so absolutely dependent on the truth of the Scriptures. So and look, I love the articles on creation.com, and I really would encourage people to have a look at it. And there's one other, if we've got time, that I'd really love to mention. Have we got time?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well. This is a beauty, because there was another one about how the scientists have decided that it would have been very easy for scales to evolve into feathers, right? Mm-hmm. A few simple steps, so they say. Now, it's nonsense, of course, because scales are completely different from feathers, and they couldn't have evolved into feathers. But one of the reasons why they want to believe that is because they believed that dinosaurs eventually evolved into birds. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing how in mainstream media you can get that subtlety coming through. Mm. I watched last week, I watch it quite regularly, The Chase on Channel 7 before the news. I don't know whether you watch it, but I mean, it's a great quiz show. It's a tough quiz show. Not too many people win money on The Chase. But one of the questions that they had, they give you three possible answers. And one of the questions last week was what class of creature were descended from dinosaurs? And one of the possible answers was birds, and I knew that was the one that they would be wanting. Yes, you know. But how important it is, and I mean they gave that as the right answer, even though it's not true. But how important it is for Christian parents to be aware of things like that, so that if your children are watching it, you're able to correct that. Because if you can't, then that's what they're going to go away thinking. Oh, yep. Yeah, dinosaurs changed into birds. Yep. So, yeah, it's just so important for people to be familiar with ministries like Creation Ministries, because there you will find the truth, you know, and a truth that is always supporting the truth of the Bible.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome week, and we won't see you for a few weeks now.
Yeah, there'll be a few other speakers for the next few weeks, and then I'll be back.
Oh, good. Well, we're
like
looking
Arnold
forward to it already.
Schwarzenegger. I'll be back.
You're on 94.9. It is 10 minutes to 5.